Our next speaker is Jeff Gould, and he's the president of safegov.org. That's right, yes. And safegov.org have recently focused on children using cloud computing and the risk of privacy violations. And that goes also for the rest of citizens, some of those who aren't as aware of the issues that we are. Safegov.org have recently released a new study of data protection officers. I think that's been released.
Yep.
Yeah. And Jeff is going to talk about the issue of commercial data mining that some cloud services may carry out on content that's generated by public sector users. So, Jeff, off you go.
Thank you. So I am going to talk about SMEs and the public sector and clouds, but I'm going to talk about a special, it's going to be a bit different from Kate's. It's going to be the opposite end. I'm going to be talking about a special class of SMEs that are actually in the public sector that we call schools. In effect, you can think of them as SMEs, and who are, as we'll see, rapidly adopting cloud services. I'm going to focus on cloud services much higher in the stack. Software as a service, things like email, document collaboration, creation. And I'm going to talk about the providers here will be not SMEs, but the sort of the giant internet companies that we all know and love and hate simultaneously, I think. And the issue is really the intrusion of a very new and innovative and powerful and fascinating business model from the consumer market into the public sector. And that's the notion of data mining, profiling, tracking users, building very sophisticated models that predict what they're going to do next, and using that to target advertising at them. These are tremendously powerful, innovative models that, as we all know, I'm sure we all use Facebook, Twitter, Gmail, all of these other services, at least some of them. And these things have sort of swept the world in the last 5 or 6 years in a really remarkable way. And they're also, I think, unbeknownst maybe to many of you in the audience, are rapidly penetrating the public sector in Europe. Not through things like G-Cloud, not in structured, top-down, ministry-driven ways, but from the bottom up. Organizations, especially schools, are adopting these cloud services in a very unstructured way, and there are very serious data protection issues that this raises. Now, what we think is that the schools and the other SMEs, you can think of small local governments, municipalities in Europe, of which there are many tens of thousands. There's another kind of SME. Both the schools and the municipalities need these kinds of services. They're very cheap, they're very effective, they're very productive. But they also need compliance with, you have very good data protection laws in Europe, you're about to revise them. Many of these cloud services are not they're not deliberately flouting the existing EU data protection laws, but they're kind of running over them and blurring the frontiers between this wild west of a consumer market based on profiling and ad targeting and what should be, but is not yet, a much more orderly market inside the public sector. So I have like 8 minutes left. I'll go through this quickly. So we've heard a lot about spying lately, but it's not just the issue of Barack Obama reading Angela Merkel's email, and certainly he should apologize, but it's also this business model, which it's not people reading other people's emails. It's very sophisticated software tracking everything that you say and do on the internet and developing these very clever inferences. So let's take a few examples, which I'll run through quickly. This is something that many of you may have heard of from the last year. It's a really interesting piece of academic research where a bunch of researchers got some volunteers. I think in the UK they got about 60,000 volunteers to provide the corpus of all of their likes, so about 10 million likes from 60,000 volunteers. And they data mined it intensively to see, if you were Facebook with access to all of these likes, what kinds of inferences could you make about these individuals? And the results are, frankly, I think, amazing. What they found is you can predict the race of a person, 95% accuracy, gender, 93% accuracy, sexual orientation, 88%. It's interesting that's lower than gender. Left or right politics, 85%. Christian or Muslim, 82%. IQ, I presume it's a band and not an exact number, 78%. Age, 75%. Whether or not you smoke, 73%. Whether or not you're single or in a relationship, I mean, of course, in Facebook you'd expect that, but whether or not you use drugs, 2/3. And amazingly, even whether or not your parents were together or divorced when you were age 21, they can predict this with about a 60% probability of getting it right, just from looking at the corpus of your likes. So, and maybe this, I'm not necessarily saying this is a bad thing, providing that you have consented to this, you've exchanged your privacy in return for the free service, and you have proper information and the right to consent, as the data protection laws require, it's probably could be arguably fine. But it's very surprising if this happens, imagine taking this business model into a school or into a municipality using a cloud service with ambiguous terms of service and an ambiguous privacy policy. This is another quick example. This is also quite old, actually. In the US, a famous researcher at Harvard found over a decade ago, you can take the gender, age, and zip code, which is the American Postal Code, and if you have those 3 data points alone, you have an 87% probability of uniquely identifying a US resident, just from those 3 data points. And that's why many US retail stores tell their customers at the checkout counter, you have to give us your zip code, which of course you don't. But they do it anyway because they can use that to guess your address and then bombard you with mail, which is probably good, but the US Postal Service is basically bankrupt were it not for direct marketing and mail spam. Okay, this is just a quick example where the telcos, both in the US and some of your Europeans, Orange and Telefonica, they're taking the tracking data. We're all carrying around a tracker in our pockets, right? A GSM Wi-Fi-enabled location tracker, which tells them where you are at every minute of the day. They're combining that with demographic information because they know your name. They can buy demographic information about you from third parties and combine it. Now, they're not disclosing that to their customers, but they are selling aggregate statistical data. So this is an article that was in the Wall Street Journal last spring. This is an American basketball team, the Phoenix Suns, which is a customer of Verizon. They have a stadium or an arena where they have games. And of course, they want to understand the demographics of who comes to their games and how can they maximize sales to these people. And so Verizon will track the thousands of people, their cell phones, track that back. They know who those people are. They don't tell the Phoenix Suns, but they know who those people are. They add third-party data, demographics, and then they go back and tell the basketball team, okay, this is the average income of the people in your stadium last Saturday night. This is where they live. This is the average number of miles that they drove to get to your stadium. These are the roads that they took and the retail outlets that they passed who might be potential advertising partners. This is already happening. So again, you can say with proper protections, with proper compliance with data protection laws, it may be acceptable. But it's not clear, certainly in the US, we have a much vaguer set of data protection laws than you do. So there's no consent, there's no information here at all. Verizon's not telling anybody that they're doing this. So this is just, you can agree with this or not agree. I mean, we're not going to get into a debate of what's personally identifiable information and is an IP address or a MAC address, is it personally identifiable? A claim one can make, there's a lot of academic research on this which makes the claim that really you can take any supposedly anonymous piece of information and track it back to somebody if you have enough contextual information. So perhaps there is no such thing as anonymous online tracking, even if the cloud vendors are not actually deliberately trying to disclose or betray people's identities. The technical possibility is there. I think I have like 3 minutes now, or 2 minutes. I seem to have skipped, well, okay. I see, I'm not going to show that video, but if you get the slides, you can watch. This is a kind of interesting science fiction video that the American ACLU did a few years ago, which sort of, it's a hypothetical fictional scenario of what data mining and individual tracking could lead to. I recommend that you watch it. So what are the limits? And that's sort of what the purpose of our organization. If we look at European schools, and I'm just going to show you a map to show you that this is happening now at a much faster scale than you may realize. This is a map. This is Google Apps for Education, which is an excellent, fine, technically very sophisticated service. This is a map they published on their website about a year ago. It indicates the little dots have numbers in them. This is the number of users of Google Apps for Education in the world, and you can see that Europe is already covered with dots. Probably, most of the data protection authorities and the EC probably don't even know this because, they're not going through G-Cloud, they're not going through government RFPs, they're not going through ministries. It's just from the bottom up. Schools adopting these services, which are free, by the way. You have to sign a contract, you have terms of service, you have a privacy policy, but there's no exchange of money. They're already here, and, hundreds of schools I think there's something like 100,000 schools, so the penetration today is probably 1 or 2%. But one can predict pretty safely that within a few years it will rapidly reach at least double-digit percentage of penetration. So let me see if I can get back to my presentation. Maybe not. Well, let's see. Well, never mind. Oh, he can do it for me, okay. So the conclusion is, so what can be done about this? And this is where, and in spite of my accent, I do claim to be half European. I'm actually a UK national and a US national. So in European data protection law, there's a very interesting mechanism called codes of conduct, which we've heard a little bit about before today and yesterday. What our organization is proposing is that schools in Europe can, as data controllers, adopt codes of conduct, which will tell them, give them an easy recipe. These are the rules of what you should and should not, what you can and cannot do when you bring one of these cloud providers in. These are the ways in which you can ensure that you are providing data protection for the data subjects, who in this case, in the schools, are students, or perhaps teachers as well. So the mechanism of, I'm not going to go into the details of a code of conduct, but it's a voluntary form of regulation which the 1995 Data Protection Directive and the proposed forthcoming regulation have explicitly enshrined as a mechanism for specific sectors of the economy to build out additional regulation which the very general data protection laws don't provide for. So this is an ideal, we think, an ideal case where a code of conduct that schools, not necessarily the industry, but the schools themselves could and should adopt to ensure that they won't let this sort of tracking, profiling, advertising business model seep into them sort of unawares. This will be my last slide. We're not taking a position on the sort of the business model in the consumer space, providing, I think that, you know, the European data protection authorities are already fairly vigilant in conducting investigations of these companies in the consumer space. But in these protected public sector areas of these de facto SMEs, such as schools and also municipalities, which I haven't talked about, but I could have shown the same slide. There, you've got a lot of municipalities, especially in Northern Europe, which are adopting these services. They need additional protection. And the codes of conduct, the code of conduct mechanism that's enshrined in your data protection laws is we think, a very good mechanism for achieving that. So that's, I think, my 10 minutes turned into 12 or 13. I apologize for that, but I'll stop there.
It's fine. Thank you, Jeff.